you.
Uh, Perhaps you can start on that note.
Yeah.
Um, welcome to the 10th Francis Collins lecture organized by the Department of English, CMS College, Kottayam. And before the commencement of the program, I have few instructions to give. That is, the lecture will be for 45 minutes and we will be having 15 minutes of discussion. And we invite these questions, comments, and your remarks to be typed in the YouTube chat box. Kindly refrain from posting any irrelevant or inappropriate comments in the chat box. And participants who are logging in through the Google Meet, please make sure that your mics are muted. Thank you. തുടങ്ങട്ടെ.
Then we can start.
Welcome to the 10th Francis Collins lecture organized by the Department of English, CMS College, Autonomous, Kottayam. I am Celine Samuel and I feel fortunate to welcome you all to the most prestigious event of the department. Francis Collins lecture is an event organized to keep alive the memory of Miss Frances Wright Collins, who authored Slayer Slave, which has the distinction of being the first novel of missionary literature in Kerala. Miss Collins was the first wife of Reverend Richard Collins, principal of CMS College from 1855 to 1866. CMS College has a legacy of 2 centuries as well. The first lecture of the series was delivered in 2007, and we were fortunate to have eminent academicians from around the world as keynote speakers over these years. And by God's grace, this year also, our chief speaker is an internationally acclaimed scholar. We will begin the program with a moment of silent prayer. Thank you all. It is our vibrant head of the department, Professor Sini Rachel Matthew, who leads all the activities of the department. Ma'am, with her exuberant energy, makes all things happen the best way. I welcome her to deliver the welcome speech. Welcome, Sini ma'am.
Thank you, Selin. Good afternoon to all the participants. Ma'am, Elisabetta, ma'am, namaste to you. Passing time might dim the picture on the wall, but the woman writer, Frances Collins, buried in nearby Ooty, remains a live presence in the green-lined pathways of CMS College. 27th November 2020, our first virtual Collins lecture. Previously, the afternoons in the last weeks of January or February were reserved for our annual Francis Collins lecture. Our guests sweated it out in our halls, behind closed doors, and under lazily whirring fans. Today, our virtual options have brought Rome right into our room. So here we are, each one of us comfortable in our individual spaces, about to listen to Dr. Elisabetta Marino and her talk on the woman's question in Mary Shelley's narratives. Mary Shelley's narratives. We look at the PowerPoint, at a PPT, which will tell us about what has happened by way of the Francis Collins lecture during the past years. 2007 was when the lecture started. It began, by then it was Dr. Susan Verghes's initiative. When she was the head of the department, it was her initiative and when the first Francis Collins lecture was instituted. It was Susie Tharu who came from Hyderabad to deliver the first lecture. We waited for a year to have the next lecture wherein Nirmala Arvind, after her first work, Video Fridge and a Bride, came with her lecture on fiction matters and why it does. Each year that progressed brought someone new. Someone could be a writer, could be a critic, and each year it was a lady. Women's issues, the woman question was always predominantly the theme of our lectures. Each year has gone by until 2011, where we had 2011, 2018 was when the last lecture was done. And now we skipped a year to come to 2020, wherein we have Dr. Elisabetta Marino, again with the woman's question, where she talks about Mary Shelley and her narratives, her undiscovered narratives. We, as a department, have been have been honored with having the Slayer Slain as part of our syllabus, as part of our curriculum for the UG English, for the undergraduates. Frances Wright Collins, to be specific, was the wife of Richard Collins, the former principal of CMS College. Frances Wright Collins was with the CMS College community. Remember, it was College Cottam. CMS College was then known as College Cottam, and Frances Collins was part of the community. She was a colonizer she was a missionary, a colonizer who lived within the bounds of the colonizing community, speaking and interacting with the community and writing about them, writing about the natives who were the subjects of colonization. So we have a colonizer within the purview of the colonized, writing about them. That was one way, one picture, one side of the picture. On the other side, you have the natives who were bearing the brunt of colonization, who were also being proselytized. As you can say, the missionary prerogative was to convert the natives, the uncivilized, the ignorant, the community that did not know God or civilization, into a community that recognized and worshipped and was aware. Now, this is what the community of natives got from the writer Frances Collins. Now, there is a small confusion as to what exactly and who exactly Frances Collins was. Richard Collins had married twice, you see. His first wife, Frances Wright Collins, happens to be the author of our book, The Slayer Slain. This book was written when she was in the prime of her youth, yet suffering the torture of having been part of a community that is foreign to her, that is strange to her. The tropical climate, the mosquitoes, the problems of living in a culture, in a community that was different, that was strange, was taking a toll on her health. And I think that in a way, or in a lot of ways, affected her output, or rather her health and what she could achieve through her novel. So it was before halfway, or almost before 1/3 of her novel was complete, that Frances Wright Collins met with her death. So you see, the novel was just partly done, just 9 chapters. And remember, it was a serial episode. It was in serial episode form that was being published in the Vidya Sangrah, a magazine published from College Cottam. So part of the way Frances Wright Collins had to abandon her writing, and it was taken up by her husband, Richard Collins. So there is a very clear distinction after the first 9 chapters of the writing. You have a man, a male, having taken the pen in his hand, and also a total reversion of perspective. That is how this novel becomes important or significant in the literary circles. The literary circles, it was one of the firsts in novel writing. It was one of the firsts where the colonizer writes within the purview of the colonized. It was the firsts where Frances Wright Collins, the writer, abandons the novel and gives it over to someone else to complete. So there were many firsts for the novel, as the first from the English department came on to be the first novel published in book form by 2 former teachers, 2 retired teachers of our department, Dr. Susan Verghese and Dr. Shobhana Kurian. These 2 teachers were instrumental in converting the serialized form of the novel, The Slayer Slain, which was also called Ghataka Vadam, into book form. And that is how we have it today amongst us, amidst us, and as part of the UG syllabus. Having spoken this much and introduced the novel to you, let me take the opportunity to welcome you all, starting with the principal of CMS College, Dr. Verghese C. Joshua, who in absentia has appointed and asked Dr. Minnie Chacko, Vice Principal of CMS College, to officiate over this lecture. Welcome, dear Minnie ma'am, to our lecture series. Dr. Elisabetta Marino, Associate Professor at the University of Rome. It's an immense pleasure that you are here with us today. We look forward, dear ma'am, to an engaging session with you, welcoming the English fraternity, friends and lovers of literature spread across the colleges of Kerala. Welcome you all. Welcome to Ms. Betty Elsa Jacob, convener of this lecture. A welcome and thank you to Dr. Appu John Jacob, who has made this lecture a reality. Welcome to the Department of English, CMS College, and to all the departments of English who have joined us here today. A very warm welcome to the students of our department and the students who are watching this program, this lecture. On the whole, let me warmly welcome each and every one of you to this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Sini ma'am, for your warm words of welcome. Now, I would like to request our Vice Principal, Dr. Minnie Chacko, who with her soothing smile inspires each one of us in the campus to deliver the presidential address. We are really honored to have you here, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Selin. Dear Elisabetta Marino, the key speaker delivering the Collins Memorial Lecture today, and our guest of honor, Professor Sini Rachel Matthew, Head Department of English, my dear colleagues, students, and dear friends listening to us. I'm privileged to be presiding over this program, especially because this is one of the prestigious annual lectures of CMS College, and also since it is hosted by the English department, which is one of the departments very close to my heart. A word about the speaker of the day. From what I have understood about Elisabetta, she is a multifaceted person with many publications to her credit. Madam, on behalf of the principal, management, and the CMS College family, I take this opportunity to welcome you to our midst. Sini, the head of the Department of English, has already spoken at length about Mrs. Frances Collins. So I wouldn't take long because all of us are eagerly waiting to listen to Elisabetta. I wish the very best for this lecture and to you, ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, first of all, I would like to start. Oh, I don't know whether Celine. Sorry.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mini, ma'am. So I think I need to introduce you to the audience, ma'am. So let me take this opportunity to do the same. So with profuse delight to take this opportunity to introduce our chief speaker of the day, Dr. Elisabetta Marino. Yes, it is on. Sorry for the delay. Dr. Elisabetta Marino, she's an associate professor of English and American literature at the University of Rome Tor Vergata. She's a prolific writer and a great academician, and she has authored 4 monographs. They are a volume on the figure of Tamarine in British and American literature, a study on relationship between Mary Shelley and Italy, an analysis of the romantic dramas on a mythological subject, and an introduction to British Bangladeshi literature. Apart from these, she had translated poems of um, Gillen. Between 2001 and 19, she edited and co-edited 10 collections of essays and a special forum of Journal of Transnational American Studies dedicated to Soling C. Wong. She has published extensively on the English Romantic writers, especially Mary Shelley and P.B. Shelley, Indian diasporic literature, travel literature, Asian American and Asian British literature, and Italian American literature. Undoubtedly, she is a woman of illuminating ideas and experience, and we are sure that she would be an inspiration to all of us. With utmost pleasure, I welcome you, ma'am, to deliver the 10th Francis Collins Lecture. Welcome, ma'am. What happened? Oh, no. Okay.
Okay, I'm here. I'm back. Sorry, but the electricity went for a second.
Over
So,
to you, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, first of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me. It is a real honor and a huge pleasure to be here with you and share some ideas on probably my most favorite writer, Mary Shelley, in connection with the woman's question. So, I would like to start by saying that normally the fame and the reputation of Mary Shelley is connected with both her masterpiece, Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus, her debut novel, and also with her parents and her husband. So normally she is considered very much because she was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, and she was the wife of Percy Shelley. And a tendency of criticism up until recently has been that of considering Mary Shelley's novels, Mary Shelley's output, as some kind of mirror for her biography. What, for example, Graham Allen has called biographism as a general tendency. So you see, for example, in some of the male characters, a reflection of Percy Shelley, in some of the female characters, a reflection of Mary Wollstonecraft. So somehow the works by Mary Shelley have been influenced by her parents, her husband, and her debut novel, Frankenstein. But what I will be trying to explain to all of you, to share with all of you, is the fact that Mary Shelley is much more than that. Another bias in connection with Mary Shelley's output is the fact that after the death of Percy Shelley in 1822, she somehow diverged from her previous path. So she somehow divorced from the great causes, and she became progressively conservative. Also because, as we all know, she was grappling with financial difficulties, with the fact that she was a self-supporting writer, with the fact that she had a son, Percy Florence, that she had to support, and therefore she has been accused by her contemporaries and also by several scholars and critics of being increasingly connected with writing as a source of an income, and therefore less inspired if compared to her previous works, to her initial output. Now, many critics also in order to support this thesis, quote a very famous passage from the journal of Mary Shelley, the diary of Mary Shelley, where she recorded all the important moments in her life. And I'm going to read this passage to you. What scholars have done, unfortunately, is to take this passage out of context. They normally stop at the first passage and they don't read what is after that, which will explain exactly what her position was. But let me go slowly and let me read first of all the dangerous passage, dangerous for the fame of Mary Shelley. You know, in June 1838, she wrote in her diary, in her journal, "In the first place, with regard to the good cause, the cause of the advancement of freedom and knowledge, of the rights of women, etc., I am not a person of opinions." So apparently she is separating herself from the good cause. I have said elsewhere that there are human beings and they differ greatly in this. Some have a passion for reforming the world. Others do not cling to a particular opinion. That my parents and Shelley were of the former class makes me respect it. But in this passage, apparently, she considered herself very different from her husband and her parents. They were people of opinions, and she was not. Mary Shelley, for example, criticized very much the Chartist movement, but not because they were longing for emancipation and they were longing for equality, but because they were violent in their actions. So she abhorred violence, not the cause in itself. And in the very journal, she continued, maybe 1 month later, in another passage, and she said exactly in October 1838 that I quote, "I got entangled in various ways through my ready sympathy and to eager art, but I never crouched to society, never sought it unworthily. If I have never written to vindicate the rights of women, I have ever befriended women when oppressed. At every risk, I have defended and supported victims to the social system. But I do not make a boast. I do not say aloud, behold my generosity and greatness of mind. For in truth, it is simple justice I perform. And so I am still reviled for being worldly." So Mary Shelley was defending herself. She was saying, okay, maybe I did not boast my ideas, but I always supported people in need. I have always supported women who suffered. I have always supported the victims of violence. And this is exactly, I argue, what she did in her narratives, from the first one to the very last one. So in my talk today, I will try to demonstrate that the woman's question has always been at the core of Mary Shelley's writings and Mary Shelley's works. And I will follow the development, the evolution, I would say, of her female characters, who are absolutely significant for the woman's question. And I would like to see Mary Shelley's output as a whole. And Mary Shelley's female heroes, the heroines of her works, as a continuum, starting from the very first one to the very last one. And in doing so, I will take examples from Frankenstein, obviously. Then I will move forward to Matilda, a very controversial novella that she wrote in 1819, 1820. Then I will move to Proserpine, a dramatic monologue, I would call it, or a drama, a lyrical drama that she wrote in 1820. And then I will touch her historical novel, The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck, moving to Faulkner, the last novel that she published in 1837. So I will try to draw a line and see the continuity that links the first female protagonist to the very last one, as if I wanted to demonstrate the fact that Mary Shelley's characters, female characters, evolved, developed, became more and more self-empowered, endowed with the power of agency, which is denied to our first heroines. But let's start with Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, the novel that she first published in 1818 when she was very young, and she published again in 1831. As we know, Frankenstein is a novel where very few female characters are present. And in actual fact, the novel is apparently concentrated and focused just on the father-son relationship. That is the relationship between the doctor, Victor Frankenstein, and his creature, the unnamed creature. But there are some female characters. And the first one I would like to focus my attention on is Elisabetta Lavenza. Mary Shelley is at pains to show in the kind of relationship that was established from day one between Elisabeth and Victor. And Mary Shelley, wants to highlight the imbalance of the power relationship between the two of them. And in addition to that, also the disequality of education and educational opportunities between men and women in those days. First of all, Elisabetta Lavenza, the little child adopted by Victor Frankenstein's parents, is described physically as the typical angel in the house, as we would call her in Victorian terms. And I quote from Frankenstein, "She was fairer than pictured cherub, a creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks." So from the very beginning, the attention is focused on her looks, not on her intelligence, not on her ability to act. And the education she received, the opportunities, the educational opportunities she received go hand in hand with this description. While young Victor was prompted to study, to develop his knowledge, to read, to acquire new skills and knowledge, now she was not stirred at all. She was not encouraged to know. And in actual fact, when she was introduced in Victor's family, she was introduced as, and I quote, a present for Victor. So I will read the passage when she was introduced. "On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, 'I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it.' So women regard it as commodities, as presents to be given to somebody else. And when on the morrow she presented Elisabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elisabeth as mine." So this is interesting, very interesting. So the imbalance in the power relationship between the two of them was established from day one. As far as the education of Elisabeth, I'm going to read another passage which is absolutely enlightening. Elisabeth busied herself with following the aerial creations of poets. And in the majestic and wondrous scenes which surrounded our Swiss home, the sublime shapes of the mountains, the changes of the season, tempest and calm, the silence of winter, and the life and turbulence of our alpine summers, she found ample scope for admiration and delight. While my companion contemplated with a serious and satisfied spirit the magnificent appearance, look at the word appearance, of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. Curiosity, earnest research to learn the hidden laws of nature, gladness akin to rapture, and they were unfolded to me, are among the earliest sensations I remember. So in the education of the two children who are the same age are nested the seeds of their different impact in life. Elisabeth is prevented from going beyond the appearance of phenomena, the surface of things, whereas Victor's inquisitive nature is encouraged to go beyond, to understand the causes of phenomena. It is not surprising, therefore, that in Frankenstein, Elisabetta Lavenza barely speaks. She seldom speaks. The only time she utters a speech is when she tries to defend Justine, the little girl, the maid of Victor's family, who was accused of being the murderer of Victor's young brother, William. Obviously, she was not guilty. The creature had killed little William, but Justine could not defend herself because she had not enough education, not enough skills to pronounce, to utter a speech in her defense. And these very words can be applied also to Elisabeth. She tried to speak, she tried to defend Justine, but she failed, because she did not have any oratorial skills, any speaking abilities. No, she knew nothing. She didn't know how to be effective. So the accusation of Mary Shelley is the fact that women are accused sometimes and they cannot defend themselves because they have not gained the skills to defend themselves and to acquire a proper position in society. And I would like to quote another passage. This is Justine speaking. Justine is another female character who speaks really very little. But when she speaks, she says, I did confess, because she confessed she had been the murderer, but she wasn't. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor besieged me. He threatened and menaced until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. So, in this passage, Mary Shelley wants to highlight the fact that women sometimes are manipulated by men, and they can be manipulated because they don't have enough culture, enough knowledge to defend themselves. And it is not by chance that when Elisabetta Lavenza is killed by the creature, she cannot even utter words of help. She's choked, she's strangled by the creature, and she cannot articulate any word. This has been Elisabetta Lavenza's life, a life in which she had no power, no words, no possibility to defend herself. Now, Mary Shelley somehow depicted the same disempowered figure, female figure, in another novella that she wrote, as I said, in 1819, 1820, and she could not publish when she was alive. I'm talking about Matilda, a novella that was eventually published only in 1959, because William Godwin, to whom she had given the manuscript, as Mary Shelley used to do, for him to read and to give advice, William Godwin thought that the novella was too outrageous, also because it delved into the theme, the very controversial theme of incest. And therefore he thought that he could be accused, he himself could be accused of being an incestuous father, and forbade Mary Shelley from publishing the novel, the novella. Now, Also in Matilda, a novel that I said is focused on the asymmetrical power relationship between men and women, a father and a daughter. Also in Matilda, Mary Shelley devotes a lot of words, a lot of reflections on the education of Matilda, or better, the lack of education of Matilda. First of all, I must tell you that Matilda was abandoned by her father when she was born, because Matilda's birth was, signaled the death of her mother, because her mother died in childbirth complications. And obviously, Godwin saw a projection of Mary Shelley's life in that. And many scholars saw a projection of Mary Shelley's life in that, because it's obvious. Mary Shelley was born and Mary Wollstonecraft died something like 11 or 12 days later. So the coincidence is not possible. It's obvious that Mary Shelley projected herself in the novel, but this is not the most important element of the novella. So the father abandoned her daughter, and eventually he came back to her when she was 16, because she repented, she felt guilty, and she decided finally to act as her father. So he had abandoned her daughter to the cares of an aunt. Okay, one of her aunts, who basically left Matilda on her own. So two elements are important in this novella. First of all, the fact that women are considered as interchangeable. This is one of the accusations of Mary Shelley to society. Women are forced in a state of perpetual infantry. I mean, they are like children forever. They are, deprived, stripped of any responsibility. They are childlike, even when they are supposed to be adults. And therefore, every woman can be replaced by any other woman. So Mary Shelley justifies the incestuous passion of Matilda's father with the fact that in his mind, mother, daughter, they were the same, because all women were the same. They were supposed to be the same physically, blonde, blue-eyed, cherub-like, angelic, and they were supposed to be the same from an intellectual point of view. Women were supposed to be nurturers, dutiful daughters, obedient wives, and self-effacing mothers. And this is exactly what Matilda is. Her education is virtually non-existent. So Matilda is left on her own, and she is left with a huge library, and she actually reads everything that she can possibly read. But she reads everything without any critical perspective. So the novel is full of quotations from many other writers. And Matilda herself quotes passages from books that she has read, but without any introspection, without going deeper into the books. So she reads for the very sake of being able to quote texts, not because she actually acquired knowledge, insights, skills from those books. Not unlike Elisabetta Lavenza, she also stops at the surface of phenomena, at the appearance of things. So she read even Dante, she read Milton, philosophers, ancient Greek writers, but just to be able to quote them, not because she acquired any knowledge from them. And therefore, Matilda is not a creature that can have any impact on the world. Even she cannot even decide for her own life. In actual fact, in the novel, she stages her own death, and she goes away from society. She retires from society because she's ashamed of herself, she feels lonely, and she cannot establish virtually any balanced relationship with human beings. So Matilda is a really tragic figure who eventually dies of consumption. And the novel itself is in the shape of a long letter that she writes to one of her only interlocutors, a friend of hers, but because she is not capable of talking to him. So she has to write. She needs the filter of the pen and pen and paper, and she also needs to know that she is about to die, because otherwise she will not be able to disclose her fears, her grief, her sorrow to any human being. So she's a completely ineffective figure in society. Now, what is very interesting is the fact that in parallel to Matilda, Mary Shelley was composing a completely different work, a lyrical drama entitled Proserpine, delving into the Greek myth of Proserpine, who was kidnapped by Pluto and became the queen of hell. And the myth of Proserpine actually justifies the changing of the seasons. Okay, the fact that there is winter, there is autumn, and then spring and summer. So it is interesting that she wrote in parallel Matilda and Proserpine as a lyrical drama. Therefore, a very different genre. And we know that theater has a cathartic potential, and she exploited this cathartic potential. This very short lyrical drama was also written for two little girls, two girls that she met while she was in Italy, because I'm sure you all know the fact that Mary Shelley spent a lot of time in Italy, not just together with Percy Shelley, but also later on in her life. So this lyrical drama was written for the two little girls as a kind of educational tool. And in Proserpine, the dramatis personae, the list of characters is interesting in itself, because virtually all the characters are women. And men are completely silent. So there is a reversal from what we have seen up until now. Men are silent, even Jove, even Zeus, Jove is silent, and the violence of Pluto, the fact that he kidnapped Proserpine, is not staged. So Mary Shelley, deprives Pluto even of the power of committing a crime, because his violence is only narrated by female characters. So he cannot persecute women. Women are persecuted only through words. And in this very interesting educational lyrical drama, in the end, first of all, all the female characters are active. They are endowed with the power of agency. They carve their own destiny. They are self-empowered figure, and they use their generative capacity not just by being mothers, daughters, and wives, but the generative capacity of women is, finds its output in storytelling. So storytelling is the most important prerogative of these female characters. All the names, deities, goddesses, Proserpine herself, her mother, are all engaged in storytelling because they can create, they're creative creatures. And in the end, through the storytelling, they can defeat the male tyrant because according to Proserpine, 6 months in the year, she will be joined with all the other nymphs and with their mother, and for the other 6 months they will be joined in their imagination, in the stories they will create in their brains. So there is no division, there is no separation between mother and daughter. They will be either joined physically or they will be joined mentally through their storytelling. And this is extremely insightful. So, in actual fact, from Proserpine onward, Mary Shelley creates female characters who are more and more and more and more empowered, more capable of making a point and also having an impact on society. And I would like to quote from a novel that I have recently reread, The Fortunes of Perkin Warbeck, which is one of the most neglected novels by Mary Shelley. It is a historical novel, and for many, many centuries, yes, in actual fact, up until 10 or 15 years ago, this novel was considered only as a way for Mary Shelley to follow in the steps of Walter Scott, and therefore find a very lucrative and profitable genre that she could gain money from. So this novel was really overlooked and underestimated. Now, before delving into the novel, which only apparently is centered on a male character, Perkin Warbeck, but only apparently, and I will try to explain to you why. Before delving into that, I would like to spend a few words on Mary Shelley's idea of history, which is meaningful in itself. Mary Shelley, in this way, followed in the steps of William Godwin, who wrote in 1797 an essay, a pamphlet entitled Of History and Romance. In this pamphlet, Godwin used to say that history and novel writing are, the two reverses of the same coin. And history in itself, without the individual stories, is nothing, is completely pointless. I'm going to quote a short passage from this essay. The genuine purpose of history is to enable us to understand the machine of society and to direct it to its best purposes. Godwin believed that the analysis of history and also the mistakes made in history would enable modern day men and women to act more wisely. He believed that the history gave any writer a sagacity, and I'm quoting also, a sagacity that could penetrate into the depths of futurity. So by looking at the past, you can foresee the future. Going on with Godwin's essay, I will quote again. He that knows only what day the Bastille was taken and on what spot Louis XVI perished knows nothing. He professes the mere skeleton of history. The muscles, the articulations, everything in which the life emphatically resides is absent. And therefore, the job of the historian and the job of the artist, the writer, the author had to be connected, had to be joined. A historian and a writer had to join forces to create an effective work that could make an impact on the world, on society. Now, Perkin Warbeck, as I mentioned, is focused on the supposed pretender to the throne of England that was usurped by Henry VII. So we are talking about the early modern times. We are talking about the end of the 15th century. So he was supposed to be one of the two princes locked in the tower, and therefore he claimed the throne of England, and he wanted to dethrone Henry VII. Now, in this historical novel, Mary Shelley focuses the attention on the upbringing of this young prince, this young Perkin Warbeck, who in truth was Richard, Duke of York. He was educated by men, not by women, in the arts of chivalry. And therefore, weapons and honor and pride were his main values. And in the novel, it is absolutely obvious that he can sacrifice everything to the shrine of fame. He sacrifices human lives, and he is perceived and depicted by the writer as a very self-conscious and proud, bordering to arrogant prince. The second part of the novel is concentrated on his relationship with his wife, Catherine Gordon. And Catherine Gordon increases and acquires more and more importance in the final part of the novel. As a very sensible and sensitive person who tries to discourage her husband from the folly, the madness of his purpose, because his purpose is costing too many lives of innocent people. Mary Shelley delves into the description of the pillages, the sieges, and villages destroyed, women crying, children left parents without parents, and crying alone on the streets. So she is somehow contrasted contrasting the male way of conceiving society, the idea of power, of violence at all costs, and the female way, which is more gentle, more sympathetic, and trying to find compromises, avoiding contrast, avoiding clashes. And the very, very final chapter of the novel is devoted to the afterlife of this woman, because obviously Perkin Warbeck is captured and imprisoned and eventually killed. And Catherine remains the historical character of Catherine Gordon remains at the court of Henry VII. And she was very much criticized by the historians for this very reason, because, she should have shunned Henry VII. She should have gone back to Scotland because she was Scottish. Instead, she remained with Henry VII. And even she was rumored to be one of the mistresses of Henry VII. She remarried 2 or 3, I think, 3 more times. And therefore, historically, Catherine Gordon was a very controversial figure. But Mary Shelley inserts in her novel a little note, a little footnote that explains everything. And I also will read another passage where the historical revisionism of Mary Shelley is absolutely evident. But let me read the footnote first. I do not know how far these concluding pages may be deemed superfluous. The character of Lady Catherine Gordon is a favorite of mine, and yet many will be inclined to censor her abode in Henry VII's court. This is exactly what I told you. And other acts of her afterlife, the fact that she remarried. I desired, therefore, that she should speak for herself. And this is a really, really insightful passage. Think of Elisabetta Lavenza, who could not speak for herself. Now, Catherine is given the writer the opportunity to speak for herself and show how her conduct subsequent to her husband's death was in accordance with the devotion and fidelity with which she attended his fortunes during his life. So, Mary Shelley is giving a woman, a very much criticized and ostracized historical figure, the opportunity to redress wrongs, to speak for herself, to change history, and to show how history might have been liked if women had had the power to act within society through education. And I'm going to read a passage from the novel which explains all. She tells us, she tells the reader actually, that she remained in the court of Henry VII to help bring up his children and bring them up in a more caring, considerate way, so that they would be caring and considerate kings. Mary Shelley actually talks about Arthur, not Henry, the future Henry VIII, as the successor. So she envisions a parallel world in which women played a key role in the education of monarchs, and Arthur, not Henry VIII, who was hostile to women, would be the King of England. I'm going to read it. My Richard's last act was to bestow me on his sister. So the sister of Richard was actually Henry VII, wife. So she envisions some kind of bond, some kind of relationship, some kind of sisterhood between women. We wept together. How long and how bitterly the loss of our loved one. And then together we turned to fulfill our duties. She had children, so the future monarchs of England. They became as dear to me as to her. When I endeavor to foster the many virtues nature has implanted in the noble mind of Prince Arthur, I am now fulfilling, I think, the task grateful in the eyes of Richard, thus doing my part to bestow on the England he loved a sovereign who will repair the usurper's crimes and bestow happiness on the realm. So this is a possible future. This is a possible future when women will have the power to educate and support and share in the government. Since time is a tyrant and I have very, very few minutes, let me wrap it up with the last novel, Faulkner, which is interesting because Mary Shelley was aware of the fact that Faulkner, published in 1837, would be her last novel. She wrote that in many pages of her journal. She wrote it in a few letters. This is my last novel. This is my last novel. Also because Mary Shelley was starting to show the first symptoms of that brain tumor that would take her life in 1851. So Faulkner is very interesting and very important because Mary Shelley herself considered it as the novel that would end this long process of development of female characters. And therefore, it is not by chance that the heroine, the main female character of Faulkner, is called with the same name as the heroine, the victim, I would say, of Frankenstein, Elisabetta. So we have Elisabetta in the first novel and a reformed Elisabetta, I would say, in the last novel. And this is not a chance. So there is a line that we can draw between Frankenstein and Faulkner. Elisabetta Faulkner is a completely different character in comparison to Elisabeth Lavenza. And also in this case, Mary Shelley devotes pages to her education. And I will read a passage, and you can compare mentally this passage to the passage I read about the education of Elisabeth Lavenza. I quote, "Soon curiosity and a love of knowledge developed itself. Elizabeth's mind was of that high order which soon found something congenial in her study. The acquirement of new ideas, the sense of order, and afterwards of power, awoke a desire for improvement." So while Elisabeth Lavenza was somehow naive in her education and she stopped at the surface of phenomena, Elisabeth Faulkner is insightful. She studies. She has two tutors, a man and a woman. She studies everything from science to archaeology, history, art, literature. She's an extremely knowledgeable person who also devotes time to the most conventionally feminine activities. Because she embroiders, for example, she paints. So in this character, Mary Shelley is trying to show that women can do everything. Women can be as capable as men as leaders, or if they want, they can devote their lives to the most conventionally feminine activities of bringing up children, which is an important activity because children are the seeds of society, or embroidering, singing, playing the piano. Women can do whatever they may like to do. And this is the message that Mary Shelley wants to spread through her last novel. And also, as far as the relationship between father and daughter is concerned, Elisabetta Faulkner is the reversal of Matilda. Do you remember the asymmetrical relationship, the incestuous relationship between the father and the daughter? Now, the relationship between father and daughter in Faulkner is absolutely balanced. I will read another passage. They did not take the usual position of father and child, the instructor and the instructed, the commander and the obedient. They talked with an open heart and tongue, affectionate and true, as a pair of friends. So with this message of equality, with this message of opportunity, with this message of empowerment and self-empowerment, I thank you all for the attention. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The lecture was an extensive detailing on the narratives of Mary Shelley, which offered new insights into her works. Yes, ma'am, as you said, history might have been different if women's perspectives were also considered. So now the floor is open for discussion. Those who have questions, you can please write it in the comment box so that we will read it out.
Ma'am,
Yes.
I'm Srini from the Department of English. Can I ask you a question? When I was reading on Mary Shelley, what I found was there are a lot of articles that say that Mary Shelley was used her writing mostly, or rather her life and her professional space mostly to push or to boost her husband, Percy Shelley, more than writing or rather pushing forward or writing about, seeing or finding out a market for her own writing or for her own literary expression. So why would that at any point of time contradict the purpose for which Mary Shelley wrote, or contradict or nullify the purpose of her writing?
Okay,
how would it be justified?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you very much. In actual fact, this is something that happens very frequently with, very self-conscious women who are, when it comes to their own life, who are somehow subjected to their husbands or fathers and whatever. So it is true, Mary Shelley devoted a lot of efforts and energy to keep the memory of her husband alive. And she published in 1824, she edited all the works of her husband, and she published a volume which she had to withdraw because Sir Timothy Shelley was really angry about it, because he wanted to erase the memory of Percy Shelley because they had arguments. We all know the story. So there is a contradiction. You're absolutely right. But in her life, I mean, I think this is also part of her own personality. She was, from what I could see and I could detect by reading her journal and reading her letters, her private letters, she was a very shy person. She was somehow crushed by the fact that she was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, and she was the wife of Percy Shelley. So basically, she had to fight for her own voice for all her life. And you're absolutely right. She devoted more efforts for her husband than for her own fame. But she didn't want literary fame. She didn't want to acquire literary fame. She, as I said, by reading the second passage from her journal, she wanted in her life on a daily basis to support human beings, no matter what sex they were, no matter what country they were, because she was also very supportive of the Italian cause of liberation. But she didn't want to boost for herself. She didn't want to flaunt her own knowledge. So she was a very shy person. So this, I think, explains the contradiction. And she wanted to also write and publish to support her son and herself. But what she did in her life is completely coherent with what she did in her writing. She just didn't flaunt it. She just didn't want to be vain in front of everybody. Whereas she fought really tooth and nail to support her husband, and at times her husband did not really deserve it.
Thank you, ma'am. So there is another question from Jito Prasad. The question is, which character of Mary Shelley reflects herself the most and why?
Well, I think that all characters of Mary Shelley reflect Mary Shelley, all female characters. And the fight for emancipation that I tried to jot down in my talk corresponds to Mary Shelley's own fight for emancipation. For example, Elisabetta Lavenza, who is harmless, somehow corresponds to a very young Mary Shelley, who felt she was harmless in society and she was not effective. Whereas Elizabeth Faulkner, the last female character, corresponds to a much more self-conscious Mary Shelley. A Mary Shelley who knew that she could be everything she wanted. So I think that all her female characters represent stages of Mary Shelley's own development.
Thank you, ma'am. And there is another question from Mr. Bachan Babu, and he has asked, I'm intrigued by the monster in Frankenstein. Would you say that the monster, as a product of cultural abjection, is subverted by her narratives to illuminate the othering women were subjected to?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for this question. And in actual fact, in the creature itself, one could see the projection of a woman. Some scholars actually have interpreted the creature as a woman because both are disempowered. Women in those days, when they got married, they were under the so-called law of coverture. So they did not exist individually. They were somehow absorbed by their husbands. This is by law. A woman had virtually no surname, because if the woman was rejected by her husband, she could not take back her previous surname. She was some kind of fluctuating creature, like the creature, who has no name, no surname, no property, because women were not entitled to have properties. No capability of acting within society. The creature is judged by the appearance, by its appearance, the way women were. So this is an extremely interesting question. And also the fact that the female counterpart of the creature was not eventually even created gives us a hint of how far behind we were in those days with our march towards emancipation. So yes, the creature and the female creature are very much connected with the woman's question. Thank you.
There is another question, ma'am, from Professor Anju Kurian, and her question is, do you think that the feminist awareness in her works are largely ignored?
Well, fortunately, not nowadays, because nowadays, I mean, in the last 20 years, I would say. And thank you to fantastic scholars such as Nora Crook and, you know, Nora Crook is probably the mother of all, of us all. And Betty Bennett also. But in the past, scholars always wanted to detect in Mary Shelley's works some influences of Percy Shelley, some references to Percy Shelley's work, some references to their lives together. So she was not considered in herself, and her work was considered from the point of view of her biography, which is a kind of glass ceiling for Mary Shelley's works. Nowadays, no, not anymore, but for many years, yes, unfortunately.
This is another question, ma'am, from Dr. Anne Angeline Abraham, and her question is, did Mary Shelley write poems?
There are a couple of Mary Shelley's poems. She did not regard poetry as her form of writing, but and she never published her poems. But in her journal, there is a poem entitled "The Choice," for example, that she wrote after her first Italian experience. But she did not write poems herself. Obviously. Proserpine and Midas are dramas, so they are written with lines in the let's call it a dramatic form, but they are not strictly poems. I'm reading the next question. How much has Mary Shelley influenced P.B. Shelley's writing? Do you think they shared the revolutionary fervor? Absolutely. Now, the attention has always been how Percy influenced Mary, but it was the other way around most of the times. Also because Mary Shelley provided Percy with materials for his works. For example, Percy Shelley wrote a tragedy while he was in Italy entitled The Cenci. First of all, Percy Shelley himself thought that Mary Shelley should write the work because it was a subject suitable to her. Bear in mind, the subject of this tragedy was incest, and she composed parallelly Matilda, focused on the theme of incest. So both were working at the same time on the same topic. And Mary Shelley actually wrote in the introduction to the Cenci that she helped Percy Shelley to work out the scenes, to develop the characters. She also translated for him a manuscript originally written in Italian, entitled The Story of the Family of the Cenci. So it was an Italian manuscript, and she translated it for Percy so that he could gain insights and knowledge on the whole vicissitudes of this character. So they worked a lot together. They influenced one another very much, very much. And they shared, obviously, they shared the revolutionary fervor, which Mary Shelley kept alive for all her life, because she also wrote, as I hinted at before, she also wrote works which supported the Italian Revolution and the fight for the unification of Italy.
Ma'am, one of our
Yes?
audience asked a question. The question is, in the Romantic and Victorian age, we find women poets about women poets. Do we have such a tradition for women prose writers?
Okay, women poets about women poets. Do we have such a tradition for women prose writers? So women writing about women. Okay, yes, I can think, for example, of this in the Victorian age. The first example that comes to my mind, for example, is the biography of Charlotte Bronte written by Elizabeth Gaskell. So women trying to support the works and the personality of other women. Yes, definitely, definitely. Mary Shelley quoted many times, obviously, Mary Wollstonecraft, and she was very fond of women writers in terms of theater. Women dramatists. And yes, for sure, for sure. Even though for prose writers, the tradition maybe is less evident.
There is another question from Mr. Bitto Prasad. I particularly liked how you connected storytelling as a women's prerogative. Could you references of the same?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, the whole of Proserpine is all connected with storytelling, with the generative power of women interpreted beyond the biology of women. This is something that we find also in Faulkner, the last novel by Mary Shelley, where Elizabeth Faulkner tells stories to soothe her father. So the idea, this generative creativeness of women that can be also a balm to dress the wounds of society. So this is something that in Mary Shelley you can find, starting from Proserpine, virtually everywhere. All powerful women are storytellers.
A question from Naina Jobo. Where do you think Mary Shelley's work stand if the feminist and emotional parts are taken out of context?
Okay, if you take out all the feminist side of Mary Shelley's work, there is a lot left in any way. From the political point of view, Mary Shelley was a strong political figure, fighting for causes such as the independence of nations, Greece and Italy, for example, and also fighting against tyranny, no matter whether it is male tyranny or female tyranny. She was against the tyrants exactly in the same way as Percy Shelley was. So even if you take aside all the feminist issues, there are also ecological issues in Mary Shelley's narratives. For example, during this pandemic, I reread with my students The Last Man. In The Last Man, which is a novel set in 2073, so it is set in the future, even for now, there is a pandemic spreading and people die, but nature blooms and all the animals thrive. And she describes in many passages how the air gets cleaner, how nature, which was subjugated by men, and trees that were cut by men to make room for factories, were now blooming again. So she describes in this novel exactly what is happening now. So many of Mary Shelley's works can be read also from an eco-critical point of view. I hope I answered the question.
There is a question from Judy George. What would you say that the monster was a revelation of her inner self, considering its orientation?
Okay, yes. You should be aware of the fact, and if you have read Frankenstein, you know it for sure, that Mary Shelley was really hesitant. She did not hold herself in a very high esteem as far as the writing practice is concerned. In the 1831 preface of Frankenstein, she describes the very, very long and painful process that brought her to finally conceive her novel. So she considered herself as imperfect, as a creator. Also because as a woman, she had already given birth to a child who died a few days after she was born. So she had a very challenging and very controversial approach to writing, to consider herself as a creator, and therefore she views herself as a monster, incapable of giving birth, like the creature is incapable of giving birth to anything, because the creature doesn't have his female counterpart, and sterile as a writer. In actual fact, she considered herself as a patchwork, like the monster is. Even when Percy Shelley fell in love with her, he told her straightforwardly that he wanted to see whether she was the product of the genes of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin. So he herself felt that she was, parts of her father, parts of her mother stitched together and imperfect.
There is one question from Dr. Anju George, and the question is, was there a space for feminine friendship as a counterforce in her works?
Absolutely. In Perkin Warbeck, as I said, the wife of Henry VII and Catherine join forces. They support one another, and they create a kind of sorority, a sisterhood, and they become the two mothers of Henry VII children. So two mothers replace a distant father, which is something absolutely revolutionary in those days. And from the point of view of the biography of Mary Shelley, you should be aware of the fact that she befriended, while she was in Paris, a couple of a lesbian couple, and she used to dress, one of the two of them used to dress as a man, and the other one used to dress as a woman, and she was not interested in the sexual part of the relationship, but she was interested in the fact that two women supported one another and were ostracized by society. So female friendship, and more than friendship, is important in Mary Shelley's work.
With the last question from Sini ma'am, we will come to an end of the question and answer session. Over to you, Sini ma'am.
Ma'am, there is an essay called "The Parables of the Cave" by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Guber. In this essay, they talk about how Mary Shelley makes a journey with a male friend in search of the cave of Sybil.
Yes,
where
that's the man. Yes.
Yes, and in that, the underlying idea there is Mary Shelley, or a woman, needs a male friend to guide her to knowledge, towards knowledge. It's about writing and the evolution of the process of writing, and how knowledge is created only with the help of the male who guides her and also translates and interprets um, knowledge into something that can be understood, or rather uh, forces, or rather encourages the woman to understand the potential within her, to express herself. So was this idea something that evolved from the times in which Mary Shelley, where she wrote and where she lived? Or do you have anything to say about it in the light of gender studies? And
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for this really thought-provoking question. Now, Mary Shelley believed, in actual fact, that the two sexes had to support one another. That's for sure. She wanted to have equality. She didn't want any of the two sexes to prevail, because she considered human beings as human beings regardless. But you mentioned the cave, and this is the frame story of the last man. In actual fact, there is a misunderstanding in this frame story. No hint is ever given about the sex of the two protagonists of the scene. Biographers and critics have taken for granted the fact that it was Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley who, in actual fact, in their own life, visited that cave. So they think that it is a projection of an actual episode of their life, which may be, for sure may be. But if you read the frame story, no mention of the gender of either of them is ever made. They're always called friend, friend, friend. She never uses he or she, him, her. So we never know the gender. And this is interesting because it gives us the evidence of the fact that for her, it was important to assert the fact that women had a role in society, but her view was not that, for her, the important thing was that we are human beings, regardless. Sex is irrelevant and gender is a social construct.
So we have come to the end of the question and answer session. Thank you all for your cooperation and active participation. Ma'am, we appreciate your kind gesture of answering all the questions very pleasantly and with enthusiasm. Thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say. We, the CMS College English Department, are grateful and happy that the 10th Francis Collins lecture has successfully come to an end. I call upon Ms. Betty Elsa Jacob, one of the conveners of the lecture, to deliver the word of thanks.
Respected Dr. Elisabetta Marino, teachers and students. It is my Francis Collins Memorial Lecture. As we know, the pandemic has affected almost all aspects of life. But unlike any other sphere, the academics have found new vistas to share knowledge and to keep the discourses running. The positive side of this new way of learning is that knowledge is not bound by boundaries. We have a flow of knowledge from the various sides of the globe without even leaving our comfort zones. All thanks to God Almighty for making the 10th Francis Collins lecture happen virtually, even amidst the unprecedented situations. We have been privileged to listen to Dr. Elisabetta Marino, Associate Professor, and scholarship has inspired us. Thank you once again for finding time to be with the CMS College community and for delivering the 10th Francis Collins lecture. I thank Dr. Verghese Joshua, the principal of CMS College, for all the support he has been extending to the department. I'm grateful to Dr. Mini Chaku, our vice principal, for sparing the time and for gracing the occasion with her presence. Our head of the department, Ms. Cindy Rachel Matthews, spearheads all the activities of the department with vigor and enthusiasm. I thank Cindy ma'am for welcoming the distinguished guests and for welcoming all the audience, the virtual audience. Any event cannot happen overnight. The wheels of this program started rolling weeks ago. It requires planning and a bird's eye for details. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of 12 dedicated colleagues who did whatever they can to make this event happen. Dr. Appu Jacob John and Dr. Gentle D. Burgess have been instrumental in getting the planning part of this Francis Collins lecture done. We extend our wholehearted gratitude to both of them. And for the sake of formality, I extend my gratitude to all my colleagues in the department. Mithun Mohan, the IT administrator of CMS College, has extended his technical support by live streaming this event. Thank you, Mithun. Last but not the least, I extend my gratitude to all who participated in the 10th Francis Collins lecture. I sincerely hope that it was a fruitful experience for all. Thank you all once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
With this, our 10th Francis Collins lecture comes to an end. Thank you all for your active participation and have a nice day to all of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.